The moment they stepped past the woven archway of trees, the world shifted. The air thickened, pulsing with something ancient and unseen. The ground beneath them no longer felt like mere earth. It was alive, breathing, as though their every step was being observed, measured. Armin reached for his knife instinctively, but the old man placed a firm hand on his arm. "No weapons here," he murmured. Armin hesitated, but the look in the old man's eyes was unwavering. Reluctantly, he loosened his grip. Layla, standing close behind, held the child tighter, her gaze darting around the clearing, as if expecting the earth to move beneath her feet. At the center, the woman of shifting form, part human, part earth, part something unknowable, stood beside the still pool. The water remained dark, depthless, a void that reflected nothing. "You have come to understand," she said. Her voice carried no malice, no judgment, only truth. Armin straightened. "Understand what?" The woman raised a hand, and the air rippled. Around them, the trees trembled, their roots pushing to the soil in intricate patterns. Slowly, images began to form, stories written in the language of nature itself. They saw civilizations rise, built on power and greed. They saw men carve boundaries into land that had once belonged to no one and everyone. They saw the first wars, the first betrayals, the first lies told to justify cruelty. They saw rulers who called themselves just, who bent laws to suit their own desires, courts that promised fairness but delivered only silence, victims who cried for help, only to be buried beneath the weight of indifference. And finally, they saw the earth waiting for them to change, waiting for justice to be more than an illusion, waiting until it no longer could. Layla shuddered, holding the child as if to shield him from the visions. Armin clenched his fists, his breath uneven. He had lived through war, had fought for a justice that never came. And now, the truth lay bare before him. Justice had never been theirs to wield. The woman lowered her hand, and the visions faded. The forest stilled. "The earth does not punish," she said. "It corrects." Armin exhaled slowly. "And those who were turned to stone, they were given a choice," she replied. "To change, to remember their place in the balance of life. They refused." Layla's voice was barely a whisper. "Is there no forgiveness?" The woman studied her, then looked down at the sleeping child in her arms. "Forgiveness belongs to those who seek it. The earth offers only truth." A deep, rumbling sound echoed in the distance. The sky, still dark with swirling clouds, pulsed with flashes of light, not lightning, but something older, something elemental. The world was still shifting, still restoring what had been broken. The woman turned back to them. "You stand at the edge of a new beginning." The old man nodded. "Then tell us, what must we do?" The woman extended her hand toward the child. Layla's grip instinctively tightened. "He will be the first," the woman said, raised with the knowledge that the world does not belong to men alone, that justice is not a weapon to be used when convenient, that the balance must be honored. Layla looked down at the child, her eyes brimming with uncertainty. Then, slowly, she stepped forward. The woman placed her hand over the child's forehead. The earth trembled, not with destruction, but with something gentler, something like recognition. The child stirred in his sleep, then fell still again. "He will remember," the woman said, "and so will you." A gust of wind swept through the clearing, rustling the leaves, carrying with it a whisper that was not meant to be understood, only felt. The pool of water rippled, and this time it reflected them. Armin met his own gaze, but he did not see the man who had walked into the city believing in broken laws. He saw someone new, someone who understood that civilization was not measured by its walls or its leaders, but by its respect for the world that allowed it to exist. The old man exhaled, a small smile touching his lips. "The earth has spoken," he murmured. The woman nodded once, and then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she was gone. The trees uncurled, the pool stilled, and the forest exhaled, its burden finally lifted. Armin turned to Layla, who pressed a soft kiss to the child's forehead before looking up. "What now?" she asked. The old man stepped forward. Now we begin again. And as they walked out of the clearing, leaving behind the ruins of the past, the earth welcomed them home. The forest was silent. Not the kind of silence that soothed, but the kind that pressed against the skin, heavy and expectant. No rustling leaves, no distant calls of birds, just a low hum of something unseen, something waiting. Armin moved swiftly through the underbrush, his senses sharpened by instinct. Behind him, Layla clutched the child to her chest, her breath uneven but steady. The old man followed closely, his steps deliberate, unhurried, as if he knew the earth itself would not touch him. They had escaped the city, but there was no relief in their survival. The ground still trembled at times, brief shudders that sent cracks splitting through the earth. The sky, once a familiar shade of dusk, had darkened unnaturally, thick with clouds that churned like restless waves. And then there were the statues. They dotted the landscape, figures frozen mid-step, their expressions locked in terror. Once people, now stone. Some were slumped against trees. Others stood rigid as if trying to flee. Their skin had hardened, their limbs fused with the land they had once walked. Layla refused to look at them. Armin couldn't stop. "They're warnings," the old man murmured, stepping over a figure half buried in the roots of an ancient oak. "The earth is giving the living a choice." Armin's jaw tightened. "A choice." He gestured around them. "This doesn't feel like a choice. It feels like judgment." The old man nodded. And judgment, when long ignored, becomes something else entirely. The trees around them seemed to close in, their thick roots twisting to the soil like veins. The path they had followed grew narrower, forcing them closer together. The wind carried whispers now, low, unintelligible murmurs that curled into their ears but offered no meaning. Then ahead of them, the forest opened. A clearing stretched wide beneath the heavy sky, but at its center stood something impossible. A structure not built, but grown. Trees had twisted together to form pillars, their bark stripped smooth as marble. Vines, thick as rope, wove between them, creating archways that pulsed faintly as if alive. At its center, a pool of water lay still, its surface reflecting nothing. The air was thick here, heavy. Layla shifted, holding the child closer. "What is this place?" The old man stepped forward, his fingers grazing the nearest pillar. "A crossroads." Armin scanned the structure, unease settling in his chest. "For what?" The old man exhaled, his gaze distant. "For those who understand." Before Armin could question him, the pool stirred. The water, still and empty only moments before, rippled outward, darkening as someone began to rise. A woman, or, at least, something that looked like one. Her form was fluid, shifting between flesh and earth, her hair a cascade of roots and ash. Her eyes, black as the void above, settled on them with knowing. She was neither young nor old, neither cruel nor kind. She simply was. Layla took a sharp step back, but the old man knelt. Armin remained standing, fists clenched. "Who are you?" The woman's gaze flickered to him. When she spoke, her voice was layered, many voices speaking as one. "We are what was before." Armin swallowed. Before what? Before men built walls. Before they wrote laws they did not follow. Before they believed the world belonged to them. The ground beneath them shivered. The statues in the distance cracked slightly, as if reacting to her presence. Armin felt something cold settle in his chest. "You're the reason they turned to stone." She did not blink. They were given time. They were given warnings. They did not listen. Layla's breath hitched. "And us? Why are we still here?" The woman tilted her head slightly, studying her, studying the child in her arms. "Because you ran. Because you still question. Because you still wonder if justice has meaning." A pause. "And because you have yet to choose." The old man, still kneeling, finally spoke. "What is the choice?" The woman extended a hand, palm facing upward. The ground beneath them pulsed once. "Stay and understand. Or leave and be part of what crumbles." Silence. The wind had stilled. The forest watched. Armin glanced at Layla. Her grip on the child was firm, Her jaw clenched, but her eyes, they held fear, yes, but also something else. A quiet, desperate hope. He turned to the old man. "You knew this was coming, didn't you?" The old man smiled faintly. "I knew the earth does not forget." Armin inhaled slowly. He thought of the city of the broken streets, the empty courts, the meaningless trials. He thought of the statues, of men and women who had once believed they were untouchable. Justice had not been served. It had been reclaimed. He looked back at the woman, at the waiting abyss of her gaze. "And if we stay?" The pool rippled. The trees groaned as if shifting under some unseen weight. "Then you learn," she said simply. Another silence stretched between them. And then Layla stepped forward. The old man smiled, and the forest closed behind them. The first sign of the earth's anger came with the wind. It was not the usual breeze that carried the scent of dust and despair through the ruined city. This wind had a voice, a hollow, keening sound that wound its way through the streets like a whisper of something ancient and restless. It pulled at tattered banners, howled through shattered windows, and sent a deep, shivering unease through those who remained. Armin had always been a man of reason, hardened by war and disillusionment. But even he felt the shift. It was as though the city itself was holding its breath, waiting. Layla stood at the edge of the street, cradling the child against her chest. The boy whimpered in his sleep, his small fingers curling into the fabric of her coat. She tightened her grip. "This isn't normal," she murmured. The old man, who had appeared from the shadows the night before, stood beside them, his expression unreadable. "No," he agreed. "It's not." Armin narrowed his eyes at him. "You spoke about the earth watching," he said. "Tell me what you know." The old man turned, his gaze fixed on the darkening sky. "You fight men. You believe that justice is something built by laws and courts. But justice is older than that. When men fail it, the earth remembers." Armin scowled. "Cryptic words won't help us survive." "Then let me be clear," the old man said, his voice sharper now. "For centuries, men have taken from this world without thought, slaughtered the innocent, spilled blood upon the soil. When that balance tips too far, the world corrects it." He looked at Armin, his eyes dark with certainty. "It is correcting it now." A sudden, violent tremor shuddered through the ground. The broken pavement cracked further, sending dust and rubble cascading into the streets. A deep, guttural noise, like the growl of something vast and unseen, rose from beneath them. Layla gasped, staggering back. "Armin!" He grabbed her arm, steadying her as another tremor rolled through the city. A distant crash echoed as a building collapsed in the distance, sending up a plume of thick, choking dust. Screams erupted. Those who had survived the purges, the war, the cruelty of men, now ran in terror from something even greater. "The earth does not recognize rulers or armies," the old man continued, unshaken. "It knows only balance." Armin clenched his jaw. "If what you're saying is true, then no one is safe." The old man nodded. "Not the oppressors, not the victims. Only those who understand will survive." Another tremor, stronger this time. The streets cracked, splitting open like wounds. Water burst from underground pipes, flooding the ruins with murky, debris-filled streams. Armin's mind raced. If this was truly the Earth's reckoning, then there was no fighting it. No army could stand against nature itself. "Then what do we do?" Layla's voice was raw, her arms tightening around the child. "Where do we go?" The old man gestured toward the eastern horizon, where the land stretched into dense forests and jagged mountains. Away from the places that had been stained with too much blood. The earth will reclaim them first. Armin hesitated. He had spent his life fighting for justice, for the hope that the world could be changed through action. But now it seemed the world had chosen its own path. Another scream. Armin turned just in time to see a man fall to his knees in the street. His eyes were wide with horror, his hands clutching at his chest as if something invisible had wrapped around his lungs. He gasped, struggled, but then his body stiffened. His skin cracked. Not like a wound, not like a man dying in battle. His flesh hardened, darkened, becoming rough, jagged. Stone. Armin inhaled sharply. What the... Before he could move, Another cry rang out. A woman, clutching at her arms as veins of dark rock spread across her skin. She, too, turned to stone, her face frozen in an expression of terror. The earth was not just reclaiming the land. It was reclaiming them. Layla's breath hitched. "We have to go." Armin didn't argue. He grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the eastern road. The old man followed without hesitation. Around them, the city was unraveling. Stone cracking, waters rising, the wind screaming like a warning. As they ran, Armin stole one last glance at the place that had once been his home. The towering structures, the streets he had fought to protect. All of it was crumbling, falling to the will of something greater than any king, any army. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to be powerless. And for the first time, he knew that civilization had never been in their hands to begin with. It had always belonged to the earth. The city had lost its color. Once thriving markets stood deserted, their stalls overturned, fruits and spices left to rot beneath a sky that no longer felt welcoming. Ash hung in the air, a bitter reminder of the last great purge. The roads, once bustling with voices of merchants and children, now carried only whispers of the past. Ghostly echoes of civilization crumbling under the weight of its own cruelty. Armin walked through the wreckage, his boots crunching over shattered glass. His breath was steady, but his heart pounded against his ribs, a rhythm of rage and sorrow intertwined. He had seen destruction before, but never like this. The bodies on the streets were not just victims of war. They were evidence of something more sinister, calculated, systematic, merciless. He stopped in front of a ruined bookstore, its sign hanging by a single chain, swaying in the wind. Books, torn and burned, lay scattered like forgotten relics. Among them, a single page fluttered, catching his eye. He bent down and picked it up. The ink had smudged, but the words remained legible. "Justice delayed is justice denied." A bitter smile twisted his lips. Underscore justice? Underscore the word had become meaningless in this city. The powerful had twisted it into a weapon, wielding it only when convenient. For years, Armin had fought, believing that truth and law would prevail. But now, as he stood amidst the ruins of what was once a thriving world, he realized the truth. Justice had failed. And when justice fails, civilization is nothing but a mirage. A sound broke his thoughts. Soft footsteps, hesitant yet deliberate. He turned sharply, his muscles tensed, ready for a fight. It was Layla. Her face was gaunt, her once bright eyes dulled by exhaustion. The scarf wrapped around her head was streaked with soot, and her hands trembled as she clutched a small bundle to her chest. Armin's gaze fell to it, a child no older than 2, fast asleep despite the horror surrounding them. "They burned the last shelter," she said, her voice hoarse. "There's nowhere left." Armin exhaled sharply. He had feared this. Every sanctuary, every place of refuge had been razed to the ground. The invaders weren't content with control. They wanted submission. And submission could only come from absolute despair. "We have to leave," she continued, her fingers tightening around the child. "If we stay, they'll find us," he finished, his jaw clenching. "And they won't spare him." Layla nodded, her gaze flickering toward the sleeping boy. He had no name, not because she didn't want to give him one, but because in a world where life was so easily erased, names had become a luxury. Armin scanned the horizon. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the ruined city. The wind carried distant screams, a haunting melody that had become all too familiar. He looked at Layla, at the silent plea in her eyes. "We move at dawn," he said. She hesitated. "And if we don't make it?" He met her gaze, unwavering. "Then we stop being civilized." For a moment, silence stretched between them. It was an unspoken truth they both understood. Civilization had boundaries, but survival did not. A rustling sound made them both turn. From the alley, an old man stepped forward. His clothes were tattered, his face lined with age and sorrow. But his eyes, sharp and knowing, held the weight of secrets. "You think running will save you?" His voice was steady, carrying a wisdom that demanded attention. Armin's fingers twitched toward the knife at his waist. "Who are you?" The old man smiled faintly. "A messenger." And I bring a warning. Layla shifted, her grip tightening around the child. What warning? He stepped closer, lowering his voice. The earth is watching. Armin frowned. What does that mean? The man glanced around, as if the walls themselves could listen. Justice is not a man's creation, he murmured. It is a force as old as time. And when men fail it, something else takes its place. A chill ran down Armin's spine. You're saying the world itself will retaliate? The old man chuckled, though there was no humor in it. It already has. A sudden gust of wind tore through the street, lifting dust and debris into the air. The sky, painted in hues of crimson and gold, seemed to darken unnaturally. A deep, distant rumble echoed through the ground, like the earth itself exhaling. Layla took a step back. What's happening? The old man's gaze was steady. The reckoning begins. Armin clenched his fists. He had spent his life fighting men, corrupt rulers, broken systems. But this was something beyond his understanding. Then what do we do? He asked, his voice quieter than before. The old man studied him for a long moment before answering. You survive. The wind howled, and somewhere in the distance, the ground trembled. The earth was no longer silent.